I want to just quickly review some of what we talked about last week, because it does connect directly to what we're going to be looking at tonight. And as we talked about this last week, some of what we're talking about as Christians, especially in the matter of homosexuality, but in really much of the world or worldviews, Christian thought really does challenge fundamental assumptions about what defines a person. And as a result, Christian ethics challenge fundamental assumptions about what makes a person healthy, what is good for the person as a person. And so I don't mean physical health, but mental and spiritual health. And so we're talking about not just a different sexual ethic, but really we're talking about an entirely different understanding of reality. And with that, as I mentioned last week, I've relied heavily on Carl Trueman and some things that he has said about this. And part of that is that the LGBTQ moment, or I would say movement, but he's talking about the moment in history. It's not merely a revolution in what sex means. It is a revolution in what it means to be human. How are we as people defined? That really is the question. That's the question of our day. The modern thought says, I'm defined by my persistent feelings. And that can be contrasted with other historical definitions of the individual, so that some people were really defined by their work, people were defined by their family, by their place in the social system, by their nationalities. Right now, modern thinking says my persistent feelings define me. And so that for me to be an authentic person, what I have to do is live out those desires. And if I restrain them in any way, I'm not being true to myself. So that the end result of that is happiness is the free, unhindered expression of my inner desire, so that I can be the most flourishing person I can, only when I can express those deep-seated desires without obstacle. And so consequently, the physical world must now be conformed to the emotional. As if my emotions contradict my body in any way, then what must be changed is not my mind, it's not my feelings, it's my body. And what we have, as David Koyzis says, is that we assume we are the sovereign authors of our own identities. That is, I think, a good summation of the driving mindset of much of American and Western culture, that the person is the author of who he is. That, and I use the term radical individualism, and that's really what it is. It's radical in its extremeness, that everything else must bow before my determination of who I am. And that's contrasted with the biblical teachings of man being created in the image of God. And some of the implications of that truth is that God defines personhood. God, because he is our creator, and he specifically created us in his image, that it is his definition of what it means to be a person that matters, not mine. So the authority over my identity is not me, it is God. The determiner of my identity is not internal. It's not what I feel, what I think. It is external. It again is God. The determiner of my identity is not my sexual desire. Rather, the Bible presents a very different perspective on desire. It presents desire as something to be mastered, not to master. Desire is something to be conformed, not that conforms me. And so the biblical worldview is directly contrary to the modern secular worldview. And as some of you may have picked up on last week, as I was walking through these principles at greater length, and as that quote I get from David Koyzis says, we assume we are the sovereign authors of our own identities. That means, that I now am my own God. What we are ultimately talking about is idolatry. So that the self, me, is set at the center of existence as a God. And ultimate significance is found in godlike individual autonomy. That's what we're talking about, that we now have a worldview in which I am happiest when I can express myself without hindrance. That godlike individual self-control, self-rule, self-determination. That's what we're talking about. And this particular topic of idolatry is, I would say, is at the root of homosexuality and transgenderism. And it is at the root not only of those two particular sins, but of, I would say, every major sin, certainly every enslaving sin or addicting sin. Every one of those is rooted in idolatry. And I would say they're ultimately rooted in this some form of this self-worship. And so we are going to take the time this evening to talk about what the Bible says idolatry is. And I want to walk through this and just give us really an outline of this. And I think this is one of the most significant topics as you are thinking about your own Christian life, as you interact with unbelievers, as you interact specifically with someone who is queer or transgendered, that you understand these basic ideas about idolatry. Because this, if you've read the Old Testament, idolatry is pervasive. Not just pervasive in scriptures, it fills societies. And we seem to think that nowadays we're not idol worshipers. We have grown past that. Science has eliminated our paganism, and I would agree with that. When you define paganism in a particular way, science has done away with that. It's not done away with our idolatry. Rather, idolatry continues, and idolatry is still a major problem in culture in the world today. And so as I walk through this, I do want to just let you know, as I've already alluded to, this is a topic that is covered in and addressed in some way in dozens of passages in the Old Testament. There are probably close to a dozen what I would consider significant major passages about idolatry in the Bible. And there are various other hundreds of references to idolatry in some way. And so this is a major study all on its own. And I'm just giving you the outline here. But I think it certainly is sufficient to help you as you think through what's going on. And I'm going to, as we go through this, I'm going to show a little bit more fully why homosexuality and transgenderism is in fact idolatry. And that maybe the first thing that's already come into your mind as we talk about what idolatry is, the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. So an idolatry in one sense, if you want to say a very basic sense, is having any God that should be a little g, but any God before God, so that there's something, anything that is more, that really is taking the place of God. And so the rest of what I'm going to say about this really is describing what it looks like to have a God before God. That's the first commandment. The second commandment is creating an image of God. And I view these as two separate things. Those obviously interrelated. Depending on your church background, you may have seen you may have seen the first, what I call the first and second commandments combined into one. So the first commandment for some church traditions are no other God before me, and no graven image. And then they divide the last commandment into two. So there's two thou shalt not covet commandments, and still have 10. But I believe this is a separate second commandment that is specifically related to creating some sort of visual representation of God. What the example that comes to my mind is Exodus chapter 32, when Moses is up on Mount Sinai. The Israelites say, we don't know what happened to Moses, so they tell Aaron, make us a god. Aaron makes a calf, the golden calf. He presents it to the people and says, behold the God who brought you out of Egypt. And it seems as if Aaron is saying, this is Jehovah. He's presenting the calf to them as an image of Jehovah. I don't think he's producing or presenting to them another God. It's not intending it to be Ra or Baal or some other God. He's intending it to be an image of Jehovah, but that is idolatry. Isaiah 40 asks the question, to who will you liken God? What is God like? He's the creator of the heavens and earth. How can you liken the creator with something drawn from creation? He's obviously far greater than that which he had made. And so idolatry is creating this image of God. Romans chapter 1, and this really, I think, is the best working definition for idolatry, is exchanging the glory of God for a created thing. So it is taking that glory which belongs to God and giving it to a creature. Right? So to go back to the second commandment, it's taking the glory of that cloud and thunder and voice on Mount Sinai and replacing it with the glory of a golden calf. It's a magnificent thing. I mean, I'm sure, a golden calf, that would be quite an impressive structure, but it's not the Shekinah glory. It's not the glory of God, but that's what an idol is it's taking the glory of God and exchanging that for something that's been created. And so that what is worshiped is the created rather than the creator. It's also Romans chapter 1, again, as well as Jeremiah chapter 10, says it's exchanging the truth of God for a lie. And that's what happens when we make an image of God. When we take God's glory and give it to a creature, we've traded truth for lie. Jeremiah 10 actually says that the doctrines of idols is doctrines of falsehoods. It is a lie, because it has taken that which is true, though maybe hard to understand, and replaced it with something which may be easier to understand, but is not true. It is that which changes the glory of God for that which is shameful. Psalm 106 verse 20 speaks of Israel, and it points back to the golden calf incident, trading the glory of God for a shame, for that which was not God, which is by nature shameful. To diminish the glory of God and to make it like the glory of a creature is a shameful thing. And that's what happens. Idolatry is that which takes God's glories and shames it. It also, and really maybe now we'll get down to some real brass tacks here, it gives credit for God's works to the creature. Exodus 32, the reference there is is Aaron presents the golden calf, says, this is the God that brought you out of Egypt. He just stole God's credit and gave it to an idol. That's what Aaron did. He took away credit from God and gave it to something, in that case, that Aaron himself had shaped, that was just a product of the creation. Ezekiel 28 is really interesting because it's talking about the king of Tyre, and it says very specifically that he made himself, or attempted to make himself, a god. And the king of Tyre looked around at his great kingdom and said, by my wisdom, I've gotten this. By my power, I have gained all these things. And so in his pride, the king of Tyre took complete credit for all of his kingdom. And that this is something that's not limited to just kings, I think is probably obvious to most of us. But Ezekiel 28 moves and talks about the fall of Satan. And it talks about how it's showing how the king of Tyre is doing exactly what Satan did. It's showing how the king of Tyre is imitating Satan in his self-idolatry. And part of the implication of that, and for time's sake, I can't draw this out, but just to state it, part of the implication of that is Satan, the process that he followed, the idolatry, the self-worship of Satan, is the same thing that he's promoting today. We can trace this directly back to Adam and Eve, and calling in Satan, trying to induce them to become like God. And that vein now continues throughout human history, so that the king of Tyre is just doing what is, if you will, natural to mankind, taking credit from God and giving it, in that specific case, to self, or giving it to some other creature, taking the credit from God and giving it to the sun, the star in the sky that illuminates our day, not the Son of God, or taking the credit from God and giving it to the rain, or taking the credit from God and giving it to the River Nile or some other river system, taking the credit from God and giving it to an ancestor or some other spirit. That's idolatry. It's taking from God what is his and giving it to something else. Idolatry is honoring or worshiping a created thing at the expense of God, the creator. So that says in a few words what I spent many words saying. That's what we're talking about. The Bible says in the book of Zephaniah that idolatry is making something other than God the final authority. So that instead of, as Zephaniah 1 rebukes the Israelites because they went to somewhere else for counsel and direction. They went to ask their gods. You may be familiar with the ideas of casting lots, of examining the animal entrails for messages from the gods, from the oracles, from the omens, which direction is a bird flying. There is a wide range of these various methods that were used and are still used in various religions today to seek direction. What do the gods want us to do? That's clearly idolatry, because they're seeking to find out what to do, but they're not going to God, who is the final authority. And we can take it out of the realm of the pagan or the super mystical, and we can look at how it's expressed today. And I think a moment's thought, you might quickly see most people, the final authority is their own feeling. I mean, it's really, not to put too fine a point on it, it is the old Disney adage, follow your heart. Who's the authority? What does my heart tell me? What should I be? What should I do? Which direction should I go? What's going to work? Well, follow your heart. That's an idolatry. It is also serving, worshiping, fearing, or bowing down before something other than God. And so that when we're talking about idolatry, it is serving something else. And I could illustrate each one of these aspects, but just think about service. What do I give my life to? What do I devote my energies to? That's what we mean when we say serving something. Sports is the very easy analogy of this, or illustration of this, because to make it today in high level sports, you can't just have talent. You have to give your life to it. You have to devote everything to being that superstar. If you don't, you're not going to make it. You have to give yourself wholly over to it. That's one aspect of that. We talk about that with work. We talk about that with recreation, fishing and hunting. You know, how many people have an idol of the outdoors, so that their time they work so that they can buy whatever gear they need, so they can afford to go on the trip that they want, so they can get to the weekend when they can go hunt or fish or whatever. Their whole life is oriented towards that, so that everything they're doing is, I want to achieve this, rather than everything I'm doing, as Colossians tells us, that we do all to the glory of God, with singleness of heart as unto the Lord. That when they're not doing all to the glory of God, they're doing all to the gratification of this particular desire. And for time's sake, I won't expound on the rest, but this gives you some idea maybe of how this principle plays out. Martin Luther says to have a God is to have something in which the heart entirely trusts. If it cleaves to anything, or that's old way of saying clings, if it holds to anything of which it expects more good and help than of God, then you have an idol. So something in which now you're putting your trust, so that if I'm looking to this for help, for guidance, for direction, for comfort, for security, for counsel, for salvation, for meaning, for identity, for growth and abundance, or flourishing, or joy, or peace, I'm looking to this. I think this is my source. And I'm trusting that more than God, then it's an idol. And that more than is important, because we recognize that God uses intermediate means. And so when we say, God provides all of our needs, for example, sometimes God just does rather miraculously supply, so that we have nothing, and through the generous gift, we have plenty. If you will, the manna in the wilderness, you wake up every day and there it is. But most of the time, God provides through a job. He gives employment. He gives the ability to work. He gives the steady paycheck. That fact that I'm earning it does not make it any less from God. But the temptation and the idolatry says, well, I'm now trusting this job. So if I don't have this job, then I can't be happy. If my job is uncertain, then my life is in turmoil. If I lose this job, then I've lost everything. I don't know who I am anymore. Those are various ways in which something that God uses for our, to provide for us, and uses it for our benefit, becomes an idol. Anything which we rely on more than or instead of God is become an idol. A counterfeit God, and Tim Keller has said much on this subject. He's one, if you're curious about this studying this more, I would look up some of what Tim Keller says about idolatry. But he says a counterfeit God is anything so central and essential to your life that should you lose it, your life would feel hardly worth living. And that's a great summary of what the Bible says about idolatry. And it's particularly noteworthy because that's exactly the language that is used, has been used, and is being used by those who are in a homosexual lifestyle, who are saying that this is my orientation. Those who are claiming to be transgender, they are saying that if I don't have this, I can't live. And so much so that there are absolutely suicide attempts because of their concern about losing this, or because of the uncertainty, maybe some of the challenges that may arise with their family, and the possibility of not being able to pursue this. So that they say, if I cannot be homosexual, I don't want to live. That's a counterfeit God. It's an idol. Because now their entire life is wrapped up in the expression of this desire, or this, even if we grant the orientation language, of this part of their being, if they don't have that, they can't express that, then they don't want to live. It's become an idol. And I mean, this has huge ramifications for our conversations, because at this point in time, the answer is not stop being gay. The answer, first and foremost, is make God the only God in your life. But let me go on with Tim Keller. He says, an idol has such a controlling position in your heart that you can spend most of your passion and energy, your emotional and financial resources on it without a second thought. So one of the ways to identify what's an idol is, what do you spend your time on? What do you spend your money on? What consumes your life? What are you willing to invest in? And willing not just to invest your money, that's part of it. What are you willing to invest your energy and give your thought to? And when you can just pour everything into it, not even think anything about it, it just might be an idol. An idol is whatever you look at and say, if I have that, then I will feel my life has meaning. If anything in life becomes more fundamental than God to your happiness, your meaning in life and identity, then it is an idol. So in other contexts, this may look like somebody says, if I just have a husband, or if I just have a wife, then my life will be full. I will be meaningful. If I have the home by the lake, then I'll be happy. My discontent can be satisfied if I have that house, job, car, spouse, child, career, let's go on and on. And likewise, in this particular conversation, say my life will have meaning, I will have happiness if I can just express my sexual desire. If I can just live in the gender that my brain feels like it is, then I will be fulfilled and content. Then that thing has become an idol. The ability to live out whatever internal feeling you have has become the idol. Idolatry, what we're talking about, is it makes another the ultimate. That's what Tim Keller just said. It makes something other than God. It may make, so I don't mean another outside of me, I mean another outside of God. It makes me. It makes a gender. It makes a sexuality. It makes a success or a dream or a goal or a plan or a passion the ultimate. That's why Philippians chapter 3, Romans chapter 16, they both speak of those ones whose God is their belly. What they're saying is, I will be content if I can gratify this desire. If I can, and he's not talking just about gluttony, but for the sake of it, I'll use that example. I can be satisfied if I can eat whatever I want to eat. If I can live the gourmet life, I'll be satisfied. It's making that lifestyle the ultimate. It's why 1 Samuel says stubbornness is as idolatry. It's a pretty harsh statement. That, and in the context, it's the willfulness, not just I'm stubborn, I'm hard-headed, but the willfulness of I want to do this, and I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to figure out some way to make it happen. I'm going to justify it. I'm going to excuse it. I'm going to do it, and nothing's going to stop it. Why? Because I have to have that, or I'm nothing. In the context, 1 Samuel 15, it's King Saul is offering a sacrifice he has no right to offer. He's the king. He's not a priest. But he is willfully pursuing his desire. Excuse me, I'm mixed up there. 1 Samuel 15 is the refusal to obey God and kill all the Amalekites. Saul refuses to obey God. He willfully comes back with these spoils of war, these trophies to show off his greatness. And it's the elevation of himself and saying, look, I have to have this. This is part of my, I would say, Saul is saying, this is part of my worth. This is part of my kingship. This is part of my grandness. I can't give this up. I can't just kill all of them and leave them there. I got to bring captives home. We can't just burn all the goods. We've got to have some trophies to show off. That willfulness is idolatry because it's elevating the will of the self as the ultimate. The satisfaction of that will make me what I want or give me what I want. It is a hope in anything other than God. Job chapter 31, Job says, if I trust in gold, verse 28, he says, I have despised God. That's what we're talking about. It's a hoping in anything. So I have a big bank account. That's my confidence. If my bank account disappears and now I'm uncertain, I'm fearful, I cannot be at peace, then I put my trust in that other than God. And in doing so, I have despised God. I have made little of God. That's why Jesus says you cannot serve God in mammon. Because you're going to hope in your money or you're going to trust in your God. And so it's hope in something, anything other than God. It is a reliance on anything, that another, for satisfaction instead of God. Ezekiel 23, I think, is the most graphic passage in all of the Bible. But the short version of it is Israel and Judah are portrayed as these lust-filled women that are pursuing all of these other gods and other nations to gratify their lusts. They're relying on something else for satisfaction instead of God. Instead of going to him and being content in him, they're relying on something else. Or it's trusting for counsel and direction. Hosea chapter 4, verse 12. And I've already I have alluded to this idea already. But it's trusting in something else to lead me. Or covetousness. I have to have, which we've kind of already talked about with money, but it applies to more than that. I have to be truly content Colossians 3 and Ephesians 5 both say very clearly covetousness is idolatry. One author said covetousness is a deified desire. I want that more than I want anything else. I want that more than I want God. I want that more than I want a relationship with a person. I want that most. It is a ruling desire. That's why, by way of illustration, 1 Timothy says the love of money is the root of all evil. And so we're talking about anything that becomes an ultimate ruler in my life, that manifests, as you can see, in a wide variety of ways, but it's made something else other than God the ultimate source for those things which only God can do, for security, for satisfaction, for identity, for meaning, for salvation, for peace, and hope. If anything else is what I'm trusting for those things, not as a means that God uses, but as the ultimate, it's an idol. It's an internal thing, and I'm just going to mention these. It starts in the heart. It longs for something other than God. I mean, really, it's looking around in the world saying, I've got to have that. It happens in the mind, so it denies the character of God, it denies the goodness of God. It says, Ezekiel 8:12, God is forgotten. God doesn't remember us. Where's his mercy? Where's his goodness? Idolatry denies the goodness of God. And that's a big one. In the conversation about homosexuality, we're talking about, is God good? Are his commands good? So that is it good to obey him? And many are saying, even those who are professing Christ, many are saying, well, it's not really good. It's not good. It's not loving to tell someone with homosexual desires that they need to be celibate. It's not loving to tell a homosexual that I love you, but I hate your sin. And what they're doing ultimately is denying the goodness of God, that God really does know what is best. In all of this, there absolutely is hope. Ezekiel 36 tells us that God delivers from idolatry. The marvelous thing about the Old Testament is we see this sweeping scope of idolatry from Egypt all the way through Israel's history. You know, there's just this stream of idolatry that finally ends up, we get to the major prophets, and we find Israel and Judah suffering destruction and wrath because of their idolatry, and interwoven with their judgment is incredible promise. We call it the new covenant. God says, I will deliver you from all your uncleannesses. This is why this language of idolatry is so helpful in this conversation. Because we're not just talking about now even a desire or an orientation. We're not talking about just a biological bent. I really, frankly, at this point, don't care where the conversation goes on those things, because they're not the ultimate there. They're not actually what it's about. If it's about idolatry, there is hope. Because God says to nations being destroyed by idolatry, I will deliver you from all your uncleannesses. So that he says, then they shall not defile themselves any more with their gods, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions. I will deliver them and will cleanse them. Then they shall be my people, and I will be their God. So that we see God is the one who opens the blinded eyes. And the reference there is wrong. It's 2 Corinthians. We come ahead, and before we do that, if if you were to go back and you were to review the Old Testament references to idolatry, it is frequent that God refers to idolaters as those with blind eyes and deaf ears. They cannot see and they cannot hear. But God opens the eyes of the blind. We saw that with Jesus in the very literal physical sense. We see it with salvation. The God of this age, Satan, has blinded the minds of men, but it is God, the same God who commanded light to shine out of the darkness, so that when there was no light, he made light. That same God has shown in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in Jesus Christ, so that there is absolutely hope for the idolater. If it is just biology, there's no hope. I can't do anything about biology. If it's something wrapped up in my brain, in my genes, if it's something in my brain, I can't do anything about that. But if it's a sin problem, if it's an idol problem, we have an answer. We have the answer. The same God who created light when there was nothing but darkness is able to shine that light into the heart of blinded men and women.